Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
And these are kids whose lives have been drastically changed forever.
A 14-year-old in custody after a 15-year-old boy is stabbed to death in a Vancouver park. Also,
this is, of course, the youngest death that we have had, tragically, in our province from COVID-19.
Confirmation that a baby died from the virus in January, as 17 more deaths are reported over the weekend. And
if we organize specialized clinics, people will know us and they will come for the vaccine.
Yes, what's going to happen with my kids?
why undocumented migrants in BC are staying away from COVID vaccine clinics.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A Vancouver community is reeling, trying to come to terms with a deadly tragedy over the weekend.
A 14-year-old boy is in custody tonight after the stabbing death of a 15-year-old boy. As Zara Premji tells us, many are desperate for answers.
And these are kids whose lives have been drastically changed forever.
On Saturday, just after 1:30 in the afternoon, a 15-year-old boy was stabbed in Vancouver's Almond Park. Just 24 hours later, he died in BC's Children's Hospital.
This is a teenage boy who's never going to learn to drive, who's never going to go to grad, who's not going to go to college, who's not going to get married.
And an even more tragic turn when police say a 14-year-old was charged in connection with the death, leaving not just two teens whose lives were changed forever that day, but countless others.
And this person will have to live through the rest of his life with this. And I'm sorry for both of them.
And police say this isn't about a good kid and a bad kid. It's about tragedy and children dying. And it's left many trying to make sense of it all.
Despite the physical size and capacities, the physical capacities of some of these young teenagers, that cognitively and emotionally, they are not there. 14, 15-year-olds are still very much have developing brains. And part of that is the developing capacity to problem solve, to deal with strong emotions, frustration, and anger.
This psychologist's sentiments echoed by other experts who say while this is a violent act, we have to remember what a teenage brain is made up of.
Young brain is under construction. It is a period of wiring and rewiring and pruning, and all kinds of things are happening. I say it's a masterpiece under construction, and it's very clumsy.
BC's French School Board says it provided students and staff with on-site support, and a fundraiser for the victim has already garnered thousands of dollars. But in the end, a tragedy that took a young boy's life, and one they say shouldn't be ignored.
What I would encourage is for parents and teachers to talk about it. You know, it might seem like a very scary topic, but don't retreat from it.
Police say they believe the teens knew one another and the Homicide Investigation Unit is working on the case. Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
An 18-year-old woman is badly hurt in hospital after a single-vehicle car crash in Abbotsford this morning. Police say the woman, who was alone in the car, ignored an order to pull over, and seconds later she hit a concrete barrier. The province's independent police watchdog is investigating. They are asking anyone with information to contact them.
It was an especially deadly weekend in BC's COVID-19 outbreak. 17 more people have died from the disease.
Our Tanya Fletcher is here live with the details. Tanya, the province is also confirming BC's youngest death from the virus. What do we know about the victim?
It was an infant from the Interior Health region who was being treated at BC Children's Hospital and died in January. Now, it's only being reported now because the COVID connection came from an investigation by the BC Coroner's Service, which looks into all sudden deaths in the province. And it often takes weeks or months for those results to come in. Dr. Bonnie Henry says despite the third wave rise in cases, this type of death is still extremely rare.
Recognizing the tragedy of a young life lost. I'd also like to note, though, we have seen a spike in cases in the last few weeks. We have been working closely with the coroner's office, and we have not seen an increase in sudden unexpected deaths related to COVID, or even to be investigated as possibly related to COVID in the last few weeks.
And this news comes just 1 week after the death of a 2-year-old in the Fraser Health region. And we mentioned off the top a startling 17 deaths over the past 3 days combined. Here's a breakdown of their ages. It's still in the elderly population primarily. The majority of those who died, 9 of them were over the age of 80. 5 were in the 70 to 79 age group. 2 were between the ages of 60 and 69, and 1 was a 50 to 59-year-olds.
All right, so that's the disheartening news. But otherwise, Tanya, we're also seeing some positive signs with BC's caseload. Yeah,
if we look at the big picture, we can see the downward trends continuing. If we look at several metrics, so look at this chart from our own Justin McElroy. You see the red line at the top. That's active cases. They're down almost 19% since our recent peak. Below that, the yellow line shows the 7-day rolling average of new cases falling as well by more than 21%. And equally encouraging, hospitalizations appear to have plateaued now as well. So it begs the question, does this mean the restrictions are working? Well, Dr. Henry says yes, to some degree, but
we are still seeing that transmission is primarily related to social connections in people's homes, where they have groups of people over, when they're meeting with groups of people indoors. And that remains a challenge. Even if it is smaller numbers now, that is still where we're seeing most cases.
The number of contacts that each case is having has also declined, she says, since the circuit breaker restrictions were first put in place a few weeks ago. Anita, Mike?
Tanya Fletcher live tonight. Thanks, Tanya. Although the province announced nearly 2,500 new COVID-19 cases since Friday, hospitalizations are slightly down again. The number of patients in hospital is now at 484, with 158 in critical care. More than 93,000 people were immunized with the COVID-19 vaccine over the weekend. Around 36% of people eligible for the first dose of the shot have received it.
BC businesses affected by circuit breaker restrictions can now access double the COVID relief funding.
Every day, our government is assessing, reassessing, and pivoting to ensure that BC businesses have the supports and funding they need to make it through these extraordinary times.
The province is adding an additional $75 million to the Circuit Breaker Business Relief Grant. That brings the total to $125 million. $100 million targets hard-hit restaurants, bars, breweries, wineries, gyms, and fitness facilities. The rest is reserved for hotels and short-term travel accommodators. Businesses who violated health orders are not eligible.
The first nurse known to die of COVID-19 complications in BC is being remembered as a well-loved person who dedicated herself to others.
Diana Law got sick late last year and died earlier this month. The CBC's Dan Burrett is here live with us now with more on this, Dan, and tell us more about this 57-year-old.
Diana Law spent her whole life looking after others. That's what her husband will remember. Law was a patient care coordinator at Peace Arch Hospital in White Rock. She's described as the steady hand that steered the ship in any crisis. She became sick in December and was admitted to VGH. Soon after, her husband and son tested positive for COVID. She had not been vaccinated when she got sick, though. Her husband said she had a kidney transplant and diabetes. And at the time, directors weren't clear if COVID vaccines were safe for transplant recipients. Health officials now say they are. Her husband says Law died April 14th. She leaves behind a 19-year-old daughter and 16-year-old son.
She spent her whole life basically looking after other people, right? Even when she was in high school, her dad was a physician, and the corner they lived on was quite busy, so that if there was a wreck, she'd go and help her dad, check on the people until the ambulance showed up or whatever. So she should have been a doctor, really.
The Canadian Federation of Nurses Union believes Law is the first nurse to die of COVID-19 in BC and is the 50th known healthcare worker to die of it in Canada. Dr. Bonnie Henry wouldn't speak specifically about Law today, citing privacy, but she notes the impact of such a death.
It is, as far as we know, the first nurse who was affected and died from COVID, and it is a tragedy. It is something that affects all of us in the healthcare system when one of our own passes away.
In lieu of a memorial service for Diana Law, people are being asked to register to become organ donors. Mike, Anita.
Dan Burrett live tonight. Thank you. Well, undocumented migrants in BC, like everyone else, are grappling with the risk of getting COVID-19, but they're also struggling with another concern.
An estimated 10,000 people here have no legal immigration status. So far, only about 200 have been vaccinated.
As Bathe reports, many fear coming forward for a shot could lead to deportation.
Cuerpo cortado, dolor de garganta y medio calentura.
Sore throat, fever, and body aches. When COVID hit this Mexican family of 4, the father says they wouldn't even go to a hospital.
Solo tomábamos Tylenol para la temperatura.
Tylenol and cough syrup were their only remedy.
En las tiendas.
The family's identity is being protected because they have no official immigration status in Canada. The husband and wife work in construction like many of the almost 10,000 undocumented foreigners in BC.
The outbreaks are happening.
It's estimated up to 3,000 cases of COVID have hit BC's hidden migrant community.
They are afraid that their information can be shared with other entities.
They want to be vaccinated against COVID, but they don't want to be deported. A visit to a clinic they fear will result in them being reported to immigration and possibly sent home. Advocates here want permission to help government set up no questions asked vaccine clinics.
People will trust us. Then if we organize specialized clinics, people will know us and they will come for the vaccine.
Byron Cruz says he has a waiting list of undocumented migrants who want the vaccine if they can get it in confidence, much like one refugee center is doing this week in Toronto. It should happen here, says this woman from Mexico living in the shadows with her husband and children for 6 years.
I know if by government they say and they respect our confidentiality, it's going to be amazing for this community.
The BC government has given assurances that information collected by public health officers at regular vaccine locations won't be shared with any other organizations. But as for specialty clinics, they'll only get the green light in conjunction with immigration authorities.
That's not enough for this family.
Y la verdad sí, sin pensarlo iría.
She says the vaccine is essential, but for now they remain undocumented and unvaccinated, willing to risk getting sick over getting deported. Belpuri, CBC News, Vancouver.
In India, the COVID-19 situation is nothing short of a catastrophe. That country now seeing more than 350,000 daily cases.
Susanna De Silva shows us frightening scenes from the country, the desperate attempts to slow the spread, and the Canadians stranded.
There is no time or room to say a proper goodbye anymore. Parks are now makeshift mass cremation sites. Many of these people never even had a chance to survive COVID. Unable to get help or forced to get help in the back of a car.
We do not have enough oxygen to supply to our patients, and then to see our patients, literally suffocating to their death in front of our eyes, it's really very heart-wrenching.
Military aircraft and trains are being used to try and get scarce oxygen supplies around the country. But it isn't coming fast enough. This man's mother is inside. He says the oxygen supply is unreliable, and last night her mask fell off, but no one came to help. She called him desperate, but they wouldn't let him in. Indian health officials now recommending people wear masks at home. And as of next week, they're dropping the vaccine eligibility age to 18. But today, this mass clinic in Mumbai ran out of shots. The U.S. says it is sending supplies, and Canada has pledged to do the same if asked.
We have to start thinking about other ways to support colleagues and our families in communities in India around, for example, medical missions.
All the news frightening for those here with family in India, where some Canadians are desperate to come home.
Worried and scared for their lives.
Shivi Darubra's mother rushed from Ontario to India after her father was in a serious car accident a few weeks ago. He was in the process of packing his things to move to Canada permanently. But last week's flight ban means Darubra's mother and her grandparents are unable to leave, too frail to try to take connecting flights through other countries.
Bring back the citizens who flew for emergency reasons, had all their paperwork in place.
For now, families like hers can only wait and watch the worsening crisis. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
And coming up, we'll have more on India's COVID-19 crisis. We'll speak with Dr. Veena Sriram, who you just saw in Susanna's story, about the challenges healthcare workers in India are facing.
More support is coming for young people with mental health and substance use challenges.
To get help, many families and youth have had to knock on one door after another, losing critical time when help is urgently needed. These teams and expanded services will remove roadblocks and deliver better care for everyone involved.
$56 million is being spent on the program. 15 communities will receive enhanced services that will add support where it's needed most. More than $40 million and 350 new full-time workers will help support early access programs.
Trans Mountain will have to pause building its pipeline until hummingbirds in the area finish nesting. Anti-pipeline activists spoke today, vowing to continue resisting construction.
Let's not give up on our hummingbirds today. Let's carry the hummingbirds' message. Let's continue this and let's work together. Let's put every effort we have.
Environment Canada ordered Trans Mountain to stop cutting trees in the nesting area by Brunette River. A slew of complaints by community members prompted a site inspector visit to the Burnaby Forest, where multiple hummingbird nests were spotted. Hummingbirds and other bird species in the area are protected under the Migratory Bird Convention Act. The construction is paused until August 20th.
BC's Attorney General is defending an interview he did as opposition gaming critic. In it, David Eby accused the former Liberal government of turning a blind eye to money laundering. At the Cullen Commission today, he testified he was told it was functionally impossible to launder money at casinos.
I wrote to the minister responsible and said, it looks like there's a really serious issue here. And I got back a letter that said, no, there's not. And when I asked about it in question period, I got the same response.
And you can find the very latest from the inquiry on our website, cbc.ca/BC.
At a time where Metro Vancouver's real estate market is as hot as ever, the region's rental market has cooled during the pandemic.
And as John Hernandez reports tonight, it's forcing some landlords to get creative in order to incentivize would-be tenants.
If you ask tenants like Ben Ronald, Vancouver is finally a renter's market after years of near zero vacancy rates.
Because there actually are a lot of places.
He spent the last month looking at apartments, and landlords weren't shy to sweeten the pot.
We could tell they were getting desperate, so they were actually offering free month rent, first month free, and then a free parking spot. So I mean, you know, when you're looking at that's $2,700 that we don't have to pay, kind of makes your year lease look a little bit more cheap too.
Rental incentives are becoming the norm in cities like Vancouver as the pandemic continues to drive down demand. Hundreds of listings on sites like Craigslist and rentals.ca offering months for free.
Before, somebody would offer a rental and there'd be 10 people in line waiting to get it. And now it's a bit more of a renter's market where the landlords have to entice the best renters to go into their units.
Vacancy rates have grown to nearly 3% in Metro Vancouver, largely attributed to employment losses and reduced migrations to the cities. And with work and schooling shifting online for many, there is no clear picture on when the market might rebound.
It's kind of all over the map right now. We had near zero vacancy rates for a long time, and so this is new territory for many landlords.
But the one thing that hasn't changed, the price. In 2020, rental rates in Metro Vancouver still climbed by about 2%. Incentives are one way landlords can actually keep prices high.
I think that these incentives are, you know, depending on what they are specifically, I think represent a kind of attempt to kind of maintain rental values.
In the end, Ben Ronald didn't bite on the free month. Instead, he bargained and talked his rent down.
$50 less, but still, we'll take it.
A trick the experts say can save you more money in the long run. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the forecast. Joe, I feel like the weather was just playing with my heart today. 1 minute it's cloudy, the next minute it's sunny.
Yeah, Monday is a heartbreaker kind of day, and we're stuck in between two systems. So that was where the emotional pull was coming from, a Pacific system battling on the coast with an Arctic front on the east. So yes, you nailed it. We're stuck in the middle. It was a lovely Monday for the most part. Take a look at the satellite and radar. We're going to see increasing cloud, but we're certainly ending the day off on a sunnier note than we were for most of our day. There's that Arctic front crossing through the Peace region tonight. I'll talk more about that later. The Pacific system coming in from the west, that will be our next weather maker, but it's slow to move in. Temperatures right now 13 for YVR. We did get a couple degrees warmer, generally 15s and 16s across Metro Vancouver, and that's where we'll stay for tomorrow as well. But watch as I take you through the forecast. It looked like we were going to get showers much earlier, but now as I run sort of a rapid update model through Tuesday, not seeing a lot of showers show up. It's going to be an overcast Tuesday for the most part, but here's 3 p.m. Maybe some spits and spots showing up. It's sort of in the late afternoon hours that we'll see our best chance of some showers. And even then it's light. Really not until tomorrow night that we'll get a Pacific system moving in. And with that, we'll keep our seasonal temperatures then under that cloud cover through most of the day. But it'll take you through to the heavier rain and big jump in temperatures coming for the end of the week. All of that. And the Peace region stuff, I won't forget, coming up later.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Thanks, Joe. See you then. And a quick reminder, you can also watch this newscast live on CBC Gem.
And CBC Vancouver is on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram as well.
A teen among the youngest in Canada to die from COVID-19. What happened and how she contracted it after the break.
Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, shoppers at the global furniture store IKEA might expect to find armchairs, shelving, even Swedish meatballs.
Yes, but a glimpse into a modern Mi'kmaq home? You can only find that at the IKEA in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Nick Maloney of CBC Indigenous shows us how they did it.
How can we describe
when a staff member from IKEA approached John R. Syllaboy about placing some of his nation's cultural symbols and artifacts among their trendy assemble-at-home furniture, he said he saw the potential for cultural appropriation, but also cultural education.
Right away, my thought was towards knowledge sharing, cultural sharing, how to open up people's mindsets to understand who we are as Mi'kmaq.
This version of a modern Mi'kmaq home, unveiled last week at the IKEA in Dartmouth, is the result of a 6-month collaboration to better represent the store's place in Mi'kmaq territory.
What we tried to do with the showroom was capture a moment of time in a family. We have art on the wall, we have baskets and moccasins, and we have real bread on the table, Luskinnigan, with my mother's recipe. Artifacts that represent a long-standing tradition of our people, our worldview, of who we are, of our knowledge, and our ancestral practices.
IKEA's David Duplessis contacted Syllaboy after seeing colleagues in Alberta working with a First Nation artist. He said respecting the Mi'kmaq community was a top priority.
It can be very easily misconstrued, I think. If we had done this without the input of our contributors, I don't think it would be successful. It wouldn't be, the intent would be wrong, right? It wasn't necessarily a quantitative, like how many sofas we can sell by doing this project. It was how many lives can we touch. It really was about reflecting the community members in our community.
Working with the store's designers, Syllaboy sourced most of the items directly from Mi'kmaq artists and his own family members, like his niece's traditional regalia.
It makes me really happy to see like people looking at my regalia and complimenting it, you know. I feel like when anyone thinks about Native people as a whole, they're like, oh, those ones that used to live in teepees. We don't still live in teepees.
Syllaboy said it isn't just the objects, the items in the room that are of cultural significance. The concept of a home, a multi-generational home where families gather, that is also central to the Mi'kmaq way of life.
A lot of people often misunderstand that we're building Mi'kmaq symbols and art into an IKEA space, when really it's the other way around. It's IKEA integrating into a space of Mi'kmaq.
IKEA expects the Mi'kmaq display to be in store for 6 to 9 months. Nick Maloney, CBC News, Jabuktuk, Halifax.
I love this. This is great. I would like to see that at some of the IKEAs here in BC.
At your local IKEA, why not? Great partnership. Good place to showcase. Absolutely. Okay, back in just a second. More news from across the country and around the world. Stay with us.
A teenager from Brampton, Ontario is one of the youngest Canadians to die with COVID-19.
13-year-old Emily Villegas suffered from flu-like symptoms just last week. And as Greg Ross tells us, tragically, she was dead within hours of getting to hospital.
We were like in shock and we didn't know really what to do.
The news still hasn't sunk in for many family friends of Emily Villegas, the 13-year-old Brampton girl who died Thursday after contracting COVID-19. Pino Penza is a close friend of her father, Carlos, who not only lost his daughter, his wife was also admitted to the ICU with the virus.
I can't imagine what he's going through. I can't imagine what he's going through.
Villegas is among the youngest in the country to die of COVID-19.
This is a very sad situation. It's not one that I want to be facing. It's one that I was very concerned about.
Ontario Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams, says younger people who may not have been at risk earlier in the pandemic have become much more vulnerable.
The variants of concern, and the ones we're dealing with now, do have a predilection more and more for the younger age groups. And what I was hoping not to happen did happen.
Victor Pinto is also a friend of Emily's father, Carlos. He told us by phone that he recently spoke with Carlos and was told that everything happened very quickly on Thursday.
Carlos tried to, give her Tylenol for the flu-like symptoms, try to encourage her to drink fluids and to eat. Then he was going to take her to the hospital the morning that she passed, and she says, no, let me sleep for about half an hour, let me rest, and then if I'm still sick, then I'll go to the hospital.
Pinto says her father found her a short time later, unresponsive.
Father performed CPR, or tried to, same time called 911. 911 showed up at the apartment. They tried to revive her. She was going in and out of consciousness, and then they transported her to the hospital.
Dr. Andrew Healy is with the William Osler Health System that treated Villegas Thursday. He says parents should be looking for specific signs if their children contract COVID-19.
If you have persistent fever, you develop an unusual rash, or you develop shortness of breath or chest pain, those are reasons to come to the emergency department for sure.
We're told that Carlos Villegas is in quarantine and has yet to speak to family and friends in person. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
Alberta is reporting nearly 1,500 more cases of COVID-19. Well, a state of emergency has been declared for areas like Fort McMurray.
As Carolyn Dunn tells us, it's particularly concerning as the city's only hospital fills up.
With their municipality declaring a local state of emergency, the desire to get a vaccine feels a bit more urgent for some in Fort McMurray today.
Well, it's a concern, obviously, right? The cases are rising, and it don't really seem to be end in sight, to be honest. So, yeah, definitely concerning.
A couple of months before, we have only 40 cases in Fort McMurray, but now it's about 1,000 cases, so the ratio going high day by day.
And that's putting an unprecedented strain on the local hospital. Dozens of surgeries were canceled today. 31 hospitalized COVID patients have its ICU over capacity, and a full COVID unit spilling over onto other wards. Council will table emergency measure recommendations tomorrow, but today it's asking for more vaccines. But the province says vaccine uptake in Wood Buffalo has been much lower than in most parts of Alberta. So the Premier says extra doses may not be the answer.
The supply is there. It's just that maybe the clinics and pharmacies have not been convenient enough for folks. Maybe there continues to be an issue of vaccine hesitancy in some of the surrounding First Nations. Those are issues that we have to work through.
So Kenny says it's likely there will be increased focus on getting vaccines out to the people, including oil sand camps in the region, where thousands of workers fly in and out of Alberta on rotations.
I absolutely believe that a lot of the commuting that's going on between Fort McMurray and other parts of the nation is a great contributor to this increase in COVID infections.
A state of local emergency brought in last year allowed the region to close businesses and restrict the flow of people. Municipal and Indigenous leaders will meet with the province tomorrow before they decide what this one will look like. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
There are new COVID restrictions in Nova Scotia, where a record 63 infections yesterday was topped today by another 66.
And as Kayla Hounsell tells us tonight, there is concern about what the healthcare system can handle as cases spread.
This hockey game in Cape Breton last Saturday is now considered a high-risk exposure site. Brent DeVoe was there.
I'm in isolation till next Sunday. I had my first test yesterday. I got my result this morning, and I'm negative, thank God.
But the risk is considered so high, he still has to stay in isolation for a full 2 weeks.
It's kind of puts into perspective. I mean, I think most people think that it can't hit me, right? But you know what? It's reality. We've been pretty lucky in Cape Breton overall.
That new concern in Cape Breton is part of the reason the government is implementing province-wide restrictions.
This is a deadly disease, and this time around, this variant is wreaking havoc in our neighboring provinces, and we need to make sure that we're stopping that spread.
To do that, schools in the Halifax area will close. Office buildings have emptied out, rush hour traffic non-existent. And no matter where they live, people are being asked not to leave their communities. But Nova Scotia had been doing so well. Stores were open at 100% capacity, restaurants open for dining in.
And it really just goes to show how quickly such a new threat can get into a province and spread rather quickly without restrictions in place.
66 cases in one day may not seem like a lot, but this province is small. And officials here have always said they act quickly because the healthcare system doesn't have the capacity to handle COVID the way bigger provinces can.
If you're still being careless about your COVID protocols, now is the time to get serious.
Strang says he is watching Cape Breton closely to determine whether the virus is spreading.
The boss is the virus itself. We can do all we want, but you know what? We can't control a virus.
But Nova Scotia has kicked COVID out before, and health officials are calling on people to step up again. They say this outbreak is a wake-up call to take the new variants seriously. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
And the U.S. is intending to send as many as 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca to other countries around the world. The Biden administration has been facing mounting pressure to share more of its vaccine supply with the world, with countries like India dealing with soaring case numbers. While AstraZeneca is being used widely around the world, the Food and Drug Administration hasn't improved its use in the U.S. The U.S. has already agreed to share about 4 million doses with Canada and Mexico.
As we have heard, India is reeling under a wave of COVID cases. Coming up, how did it get so bad? And what's the country's way out of this crisis?
CBC Primetime News with Hannah Gartner and Peter Mansbridge.
New Democrat MP Sven Robinson is going after a promotion. He wants to lead the party. Robinson will enter the race officially tomorrow. The NDP is holding a leadership convention in October. Bicycles jammed a couple of Vancouver bridges this evening at rush hour. Two-wheeled protesters were peddling a plan to cut out cars on one of the city's main arteries. Here's the CBC's John Gibbs.
The plan was to tangle rush hour traffic on two bridges, two of the main routes out of downtown Vancouver. to symbolically seize the streets for bicycles.
I just want to make sure you curb lane and go. There's no more talking. I'm not going to listen to you.
The cyclists compromised, in effect taking over 3 of the 4 lanes. Even when they're not riding in protest, cyclists are making their presence felt, partly because of increasing concern over air pollution and because of a desire for physical fitness.
In the past, bicycles have always been viewed as recreational or sort of a fringe kind of transportation use, but especially in Vancouver nowadays, I mean, you see bicycles everywhere.
Vancouver already has special bike routes for cyclists who commute to work, side streets that are altered to discourage automobiles and help the bicycles get downtown on time. But some cyclists want more. They want the Burrard Street Bridge. They're tired of competing with pedestrians for a narrow sidewalk. Some people want to remove all private vehicles from the bridge and the street to restrict the entire 6 lanes to buses, pedestrians, and bicycles. People like Guy Wira, who organized the bridge ride.
We're raising the issue. We're making people talk. We're maybe making some people mad, but some people get mad at anything.
The city is already considering giving 2 lanes to bicycles, but the idea of cutting out any lanes for cars angers downtown businesses.
There will be fewer people who want to put their headquarters downtown because their employees will have more difficulty getting to the office in the morning.
Today, getting home was the problem, and it was the cyclists' fault.
I've got a meeting to go to, and you know, I'm busy stuck in traffic.
They take up the pedestrians' time. They're worse than pedestrians, and they're worse than reckless drivers. They just cut everybody off.
The cyclists probably didn't make new friends with this ride, but they insist that in the long term, the city will have to give more space to vehicles with 2 wheels. John Gibbs, CBC News, Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's hard to remember that they're kids sometimes because you look at like them and sometimes they're in adult-sized bodies.
A 14-year-old boy remains in custody in connection with the death of a 15-year-old boy who was stabbed in the chest on Saturday. The victim died on Sunday, 24 hours after the altercation between 2 groups of youths at Almond Park in Vancouver's Dunbar neighborhood. Homicide investigators are still collecting evidence, but had enough information to lay a single charge of possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose.
25% of people in our network already were affected by COVID. I have a waiting list of people who want the vaccine.
Concern tonight about vaccinations from undocumented foreigners who live here. Many fear getting the shot will lead to them being deported. The BC government has promised that won't happen, but advocates want a special vaccination clinic set up for migrants without status.
The coroner's investigation, which concluded last week, determined that COVID-19 was indeed a factor in this infant's death. This is, of course, the youngest death that we have had, tragically, in our province from COVID-19.
BC health officials confirmed the death of a baby from COVID-19 in January and announced 17 more deaths from the virus over the weekend. They're also reporting almost 2,500 new cases over 3 days.
Skyrocketing COVID-19 cases in India have propelled that country into a humanitarian crisis. Yesterday, India set a global record of more than 350,000 positive cases in a single day. Hospitals continue to struggle with low supplies of medicine, oxygen, and hospital beds. And joining us tonight is Dr. Veena Sriram. She's an assistant professor at UBC in the School of Population and Public Health. And she's also part of a global India COVID SOS network addressing the crisis in India. Dr. Sriram, thanks for joining us tonight. Can I ask you, first of all, to take us through what led to the COVID crisis that's escalating in India? It's a horrific situation there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. The health system was sort of different for depending on how much you earned, what your income level was, what part of society you were in. It was really two health systems for two classes. And I think what's happened during COVID right now is that it's become a universal reality where everyone is struggling and the system is under tremendous strain. What led to this problem, though, is a sense of complacency that set in between the last wave last year and what's happening now. The time that we had in between these two waves could have been spent in further preparedness and making sure that we had oxygen supplies and making sure that the right protocols were put in place. And unfortunately, that was not done. I think a final reason is around sequencing of variants. India was not necessarily sequencing all the cases that it had, so we don't quite know what is causing this current spread in terms of the makeup of the virus. But many suspect that it is due to a mix of variants right now, and we have more work to do to figure what those are.
And India's health system is under tremendous strain right now. What are the biggest challenges facing doctors, healthcare workers in India right now?
There is an immense shortage of beds. So if people wanted to come to the hospital to seek care, there's just nowhere for them to go. When they do come to the hospital, some hospitals are struggling with the shortage of oxygen. So there was a situation in Delhi a few days ago where about over 20 patients died because the truck carrying oxygen that was coming to the hospital was delayed by a few hours. There are so many stories like this happening in many parts of the country. The other thing people are facing is that because there are no beds, people now have to take care of their patients at home. And that means that doctors are constantly on the phone with their patients. Family members are having to care for people who are sick with very little medical training. So you're seeing a lot of frantic calls on Twitter and WhatsApp and Facebook asking for help regarding how can we help our family member in need.
Yeah, okay. So what can Canada and other countries do to try to help out?
So we're seeing a growing number of countries start to step in. For example, the United States, the Biden administration today announced they're releasing more vaccines to India. Canada has also made some steps towards announcing a plan to help to support India. What we need to do right now is to ramp these efforts up, and we have to do it now because the situation is dire. It is going to get worse if we don't solve it. I think what we truly need, though, is a reimagining of how we as a globe respond to pandemics. The pandemic in Canada is not over unless it's over everywhere. And maybe we can start with, for example, reimagining the vaccine issue and ensuring that there are waivers for IP when we have this kind of crisis.
All right, we will leave it at that. Dr. Sriram, thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's where Canada's fastest growing Black population calls home, and it's a mix of both the newly arrived and those who've been there for generations. Our new series, Black on the Prairies, coming up.
6:42 on this Monday evening. There's a live look south from atop the CBC building in downtown Vancouver. Turned out to be a lovely day on the South Coast. Bit of a surprise, but you know what? We'll take it. As for what's in store for tomorrow and the rest of the week, Johanna's going to tell us about that next.
When your backyard is burning, is anywhere safe? I'm Adrienne Lamb, the host of a new podcast, World on Fire. Join us on the front lines of wildfires burning around the world. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Johanna Wagstaffe back with us. You know, I like to complain when Mondays turn out the way today did after kind of a dreadful weekend. But you know what? I'm over it. I'm over it, and we'll take it for sure.
Yeah, it only took you 24 hours. I did think of you when I saw the forecast. Yes, it is a very un-Mike forecast. Yes. But we've got some sunshine in the long range. I've already got my eye on the weekend. I mean, in my opinion, it's never too early to look at the forecast models for the weekend. But there's some interesting things happening. So I'll break that down in a minute. I wanted to start off, though, with the current temperatures across the country. Always nice to check in April with what's going on across the country, because April is an interesting month. Just 7 in through Toronto right now, 6 over towards Halifax, 3 for St. John's. Big storm has stalled out over Atlantic Canada, bringing hurricane force winds today to parts of the East Coast. And then you can see all that Arctic air in the blues and the purples. Full-on blizzard happening now for a huge portion of Nunavut. Rankin Inlet is seeing 90-kilometer-per-hour winds tonight, with 20 centimeters in the forecast for tomorrow. In fact, the next 24 hours expected to basically be near zero visibility up north. Very typical for April, but this is probably their strongest winter storm yet this season. We've got a high pressure that tried to bring us sunshine for most of the day, but as you can see, we're sort of dealing with two systems coming at us from either side. Low pressure system will bring high cloud thickening up through the day, so a mainly overcast Tuesday to the south coast. At the same time, look at that cold front descending through the piece. We've not got quite the blizzard conditions we're seeing up north, but we're still talking strong winds and maybe 5+ centimeters of snow, with a drop in temperatures of about 10 degrees. Prince George are sort of on the edge of that, but seeing lots of fresh snow for the Rockies. The Pacific system, meanwhile, looking to bring showers, as I mentioned earlier, tomorrow evening. A mainly cloudy but mainly dry Tuesday. And even then, not a ton of rain for the end of the week. Kelowna and Cranbrook getting some nice weather tomorrow, basically seasonal conditions. Still looking at relatively high fire danger through the Cariboo region, I should mention. 14 for Wednesday, and then a nice little temperature bump as we get into Thursday and Friday. I mentioned the weekend, still a bit of a guessing game. I can tell whether I've got high or low confidence in the forecast at this point, depending on how flip-floppy the models are, and they are flip-flopping. So don't put too much faith in that sunshine in 15 is what I'm saying yet. I'll keep you posted.
Flip-floppy, flip-floppy, okay. We'll keep
That's
that
technical.
In mind. Highly technical.
The fastest growing Black population in Canada is on the prairies, where it has quadrupled in the last 20 years. Most are first-generation Canadians, while the presence of other Black people in the region stretches back centuries.
Omara Issa takes a look tonight at this rich history through one family's story.
My great-grandfather, Henry Sneed is buried here. He died in 1914.
Ron Mapp has been to this spot many times growing up as a boy.
My grandmother is buried here.
His family goes back 6 generations in Alberta. It all started here in Amber Valley over 100 years ago, and it wasn't an easy journey.
My great-grandfather, Henry Sneed, led the original scouting party up here, along with 2 other scouts. They liked the land, and they decided to bring up the other families from Oklahoma.
Amber Valley was the largest and most prosperous black settlement west of Ontario. At its height, 1,000 people lived in the community 130 kilometers north of Edmonton. It had a school, a church, and a famous baseball team. Ron now lives in Edmonton and has 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren. While they didn't grow up in Amber Valley, the Mapp family history is something Ron has been passing along to his children for years.
I heard a lot of stories from my father and my uncle when I was young. I spent a lot of time in Amber Valley on the farm, sometimes weeks and months at a time.
While the Mapp family feels connected to its past in Alberta, it was a painful lesson for Mapp's great-grandfather, Henry Sneed, learning that Canada wasn't as welcoming as he'd hoped.
Growing up in USA and Texas and Oklahoma, going through Jim Crow and seeing all the racial discrimination, and to bring his family and other families up here, hoping that they wouldn't have to endure the same hardships.
Only 4 months after Henry Sneed settled in Alberta, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier signed an order in council prohibiting black migration for 1 year, suggesting that black people were deemed unsuitable to the climate and requirements of Canada. Within a year of this order, black migration slowed almost to a halt across the country, contributing to a racist and isolating environment for black Canadians who had already made their way here.
When the Canadian governments invited Americans, they didn't think that African Americans would answer the call, and they did.
Karina Vernon has been studying the history and impact of black people on the prairies for decades.
They risked everything, moving across a border into a territory that they had no idea where they were coming. They'd heard that there was greater freedom under the Canadian flag. What they found was, of course, a mixture of freedom, but of also complications.
This year, Canada Post issued a stamp to honor Henry Sneed and Amber Valley. The stamp depicts Sneed standing tall along with other prominent community members of the time.
To take on such an endeavor to bring the families from Oklahoma up to Western Canada. This is my grandfather.
Ron Mapp hopes his family's story and other black families' legacy on the prairies will be taught in schools across the country to recognize their place in Canada. For now, though, Ron and his family continue to celebrate their roots.
Amber Valley is home. No matter where I go, Amber Valley will always be home.
Omera Isa, CBC News, Amber Valley, Alberta.
When Doris the chicken was snatched by an eagle, well, her owners weren't giving her much of a chance. But Doris is one tough bird. The story of her return to the coop next.
Bird collisions are the #3 cause of mortality for birds in North America. We've worked closely with Altalink to develop the line fly. This is an automated method for installing bird flight diverters like the one I have in my hand. The traditional method of installing bird flight diverters has been with a helicopter, an alignment, or a bucket truck. There was risk associated with the old method. The helicopters and the linemen were operating very close to the wire environment. This is an automated method for taking some risk out of the system.
Bird collisions with the transmission line wires is primarily associated with water bodies, so waterfowl. So these are birds that tend to have small wings, larger bodies, and it's really difficult for them to maneuver around the wires. So we install these markers on what's called the overhead shield wire, and that's that uppermost wire. Its purpose is to protect the system from lightning damage, but it's also thinner diameter than the conductor wires we use. And so because of that, it can often appear invisible to birds, especially in low light conditions. So these tags really just help act as a warning system so that they can see that wire better and avoid a collision. We wanted to find ways that we could automate the installation of bird markers. 2 years ago, we started collaborating with Fulcrum Air, who is a local robotics and UAV solutions company.
This is a fully autonomous robot that has taken some of the most advanced technology available to us, incorporated in this machine. It is remotely controlled from our support vehicles that are up to 1.5 kilometers away. The unmanned coaxial mini helicopter picks the line fly up and places it on the overhead power transmission wire and begins to advance automatically, placing the bird flight diverters at any predetermined distance. We can install between 300 and 600 bird flight diverters per day.
It's a really efficient way that we can install bird markers in areas that might have otherwise been really difficult to get a bucket truck in, like say over top of a water body, or say like a steep coulee where a helicopter isn't able to access.
The bird flight diverters go onto these 4 canisters and they're spread open like this. And then the drums or the canisters advance when we're on the power line and installs each of these bird flight diverters into position. It's stabilized in the air through the use of these 4 propellers. The line fly advances along the power line through the use of these 4 drive wheels. A lot of us began our careers in the oil and gas industry, and with the downturn in the oil and gas industry, we founded Fulcrum Air in 2016. Calgary is abundant with very talented engineers. The machines are entirely designed and engineered in Calgary by our teams from scratch. All the mechanical aspects and the software and the code we've written ourselves.
Hi, I'm Amy Bao, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC Vancouver is a proud returning sponsor of the 20th annual DOXA Documentary Film Festival. Get your tickets and watch amazing films from the comfort of your own home, May 6th to 16th. Learn more at doxafestival.ca. And the CBC News Vancouver team wants to see your beautiful photos of beautiful British Columbia. Email your photos to bcphotos@cbc.ca for your chance to be featured.
All right, our newscast is now officially going to the birds because a chicken in Comox on the island pulled off a great escape after she was bird-napped by an eagle.
That's Doris, the Rhode Island red chicken, showing off her battle scars after her skirmish with the eagle. She lost a third of her feathers and a bit of flesh. Last week, she went missing after an eagle invaded her coop. Doris was swept away in its claws and went missing for 3 days. Nobody knows how, but she eventually made a triumphant return when she reappeared in the coop.
I think it's pretty good, you know. She's a tough bird. It'll be nice when she's laying again and producing, but we'll give her a bit of a holiday.
Yes, a much-deserved holiday. Doris is now on pain medication, and along with the rest, recovering from her injuries at home.
I was talking about this earlier. Fascinating how Doris, who's probably never left her coop before, maybe gone close by, how does she know how to get back?
Oh, you raise a good question, Anita. I don't know if we can answer that.
Some Google Maps.
Very lucky, Doris, and on the road to recovery. The Rhode Island red chicken. That's great.
Doris is great.
All right, just a reminder, you can always watch our newscasts online anytime at cbc.ca. BC.
Our next local news is with Dan Barrett at 11 o'clock after the National. Have a good night.
Good night.